Michael.
Yeah, so my origin story, I guess begins, I drew my first comic was, I guess, like age 5. It was a story about a whale attacking a submarine. It's drawn on construction paper. I think you can find it online somewhere. But I spent entirely way too much time reading comics, drawing comics, and really kind of not seeing it as a career, but seeing it as a passion of mine for a long time. In college, I ended up starting a cartoonist association at Rutgers where we published a weekly newspaper and a quarterly comic book. And that was my first real foray into the art of it. Mostly like gag strips and short, I would say like 3 to 4 page stories. But unlike everyone else, my first career was in animation, where I had overheard that somebody was interning in an animation studio, and that just sounded like the best idea. And in doing so, started a career for the last 10 years working in New York Animation. So I've worked at, it was Jumbo Pictures, did Disney's Doug, and I worked at Nickelodeon on Blue's Clues, and I spent a lot of time working on other people's shows and made a career as a professional artist, but I'd always kind of realized I was neglecting that other part of me, which is telling my own stories and doing my own art. And unfortunately, at one point, I was let go from a job because the studio had closed down. And friends of mine had an idea that was one of those ideas that I really wanted to get behind. So Swifty Lang is somebody I've been friends with for a while. I met Chris Mangan through him, and he just said, werewolves on the US-Mexico border. And it incited my imagination, and I realized that not only did we have a story to tell, but I could bring something to it. And even given my lifelong love for Marvel Comics, I'm not a Marvel artist. You know, I don't have those chops. So the goal for us as a team was to tell a story collaboratively and develop it. And it was like the process of learning how to tell a story was enormous for us. And then for my doing it was to illustrate it in a way that serviced the subject matter. You know, that it was unique. It had its own voice. So for us, you know, I spent years in animation pitching shows. One of them got to pilot, but otherwise it was a lot of years of pitching. And so for us, we pitched Feeding Ground in 2009 with a pitch book that was designed by Chris and was something that I felt comfortable sharing because I knew how to pitch. I had a list of publishers, and I wind up at ARCHAIA simply to take a break. I had no idea who they were. I go to the table. I thought that Stephen was just working the register, editor-in-chief, Stephen Christie, and we got to talking, and because they had a book that was Werewolves in the Revolutionary War, the Revere, well, I mentioned Feeding Ground. I was like, oh, I have a book about werewolves, and it got passed up. I watched the book get handed from Stephen to Mark, and then to PJ, and PJ comes over, and he's like, let's do this. If those two guys want this, then we're doing it. And before I could say anything else, he goes, well, let's publish it bilingual. And with that, all of my planning and all of my research in terms of us developing the story together and knowing what publishers I wanted to talk to, it all went out the window when I realized that there was a new home for this book that I hadn't even considered, you know, that they would be willing to take that leap not only on us as creators, but also service the material by doing something so audacious as a bilingual release, which I've never heard of, and still haven't to this day. The floppies were a flip book, so the same story was printed twice. And then since then, like everyone said, it's a hard slog to learn the craft and the time it takes to do a comic, but like, we were so fortunate to just happen to find ARCHAIA at the right time, and you know, I've been learning ever since.
So let's get to the big question and why everyone's here is how do in fact do you create a great graphic novel? So the way we're going to kind of break this down is essentially 5 parts. One is the concept, which I'm sure many of you have right now. From there, submission process or the packaging, and then the creative and production, and then the marketing, which is almost as critically important as the concept itself. So in terms of leading the questions, we'll get through the concept part here, and then Mel will go out and you guys can begin to ask questions on the other section. So this is to whoever raises their hand first or grabs the mic faster. So how long did it take you to come up with the concept? And all of you have more than just the one book, so we don't have to speak directly about the one book in front of us, but how do you go about your concept process, and what does it mean, and do you play it off other people, or is it solely your own? Laura.
I raised my hand first. I was that kid in school.